It was just another quiet evening in the suburbs until a teenage ballerina was zip-tied and detained for wearing leggings. What the HOA didn't know was that her mother was the state's attorney general. What followed wasn't just a legal battle, it was a reckoning. This is the true story of power, control, and the moment one woman turned a neighborhood's fear into justice. Crestwood Lakes looked like every suburban dream: pristine lawns, picket fences, quiet sidewalks. But behind its manicured perfection hid something colder: fear. The kind of fear you don't talk about. The kind enforced by clipboards and HOA bylaws. Emma Reynolds was 16, a ballet student. Soft-spoken but fierce in her dedication. On a Tuesday evening, after a brutal rehearsal, she walked home alone. Her muscles ached. Her hoodie clung to her sweat, and her leggings, standard dancewear, were the only thing comfortable left on her body. She didn't see the HOA guards until they stepped out from behind the hedges. 3 adults in dark green shirts with Community Enforcement Unit stitched across their chests. Zip ties in hand, radios crackling. Emma froze, confused. "You're in violation of the dress code," one said. "Form-fitting clothing is prohibited outside after 5:30. She laughed. "I just came from ballet. I didn't know." Before she could finish, they restrained her. The zip ties bit into her wrists. Her voice cracked as she tried to ask what was happening. But they marched her away, ignoring her tears, dragging her 2 blocks to the HOA security post, a shed beside the clubhouse turned interrogation room. Inside sat Karen Bellamy, the president of the HOA, a woman with a permanent scowl and perfectly aligned rows of neighborhood violation reports. Karen glanced up as Emma entered, offered no comfort, and barely made eye contact. "Sit her down," she said. "Document the offense." And Emma tried to speak again. "Please, just call my mom. This isn't okay." Karen smirked. "You kids think rules don't apply to you. That ends today." But what Karen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Emma's mother wasn't just some concerned parent. Gabriela Reynolds was the state attorney general. Emma managed to get one call out. One sob-filled, panicked call. And 20 minutes later, the roar of an SUV engine cut through the night air as Gabriela arrived. The doors of the shed flew open. Gabriela stood in a dark suit, heels planted, fire in her eyes. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She looked once at her daughter zip-tied, tear-streaked, humiliated, and turned to Karen. "Release her, right now!" Karen stood, indignant. "She broke the rules. We're authorized to detain violators." Gabriela stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "You are not law enforcement. You are not authorized to detain a minor. And what you've done here isn't just unethical, it's criminal." Karen's face faltered. "We were following protocol." "I'm the person who writes protocol," Gabriela said. "And you just crossed a line I built my entire career defending." Emma was freed within seconds. But for Gabriela, it didn't end there. That night, Gabriela held her daughter close, not as the state's top prosecutor, but as a mother. And when Emma finally fell asleep, Gabriela opened her laptop and began her real work. The next morning, she launched a formal civil complaint, not just for Emma, for every resident who had quietly endured Karen's unchecked authority. As Gabriela and her legal team dug deeper, they uncovered something far more sinister than an overzealous dress code. Karen and her HOA team had been keeping files, surveillance logs of residents. Many were children, notes on what they wore, how long they lingered outside, who they spoke to. Dozens of residents had been monitored, fined, warned. Even threatened with eviction. A neighbor was fined for excessive porch sitting. Another for shirtless jogging. Parents were warned when their kids rode bikes too loudly. It wasn't community management. It was social control. Gabriela moved quickly. A lawsuit was filed: unlawful detainment, civil rights violations, privacy invasion, abuse of authority, emotional distress. Then came the press. The headline hit local news within hours. State Attorney General sues HOA over illegal detainment of teen daughter. The emergency town hall was packed. A quiet rage hummed beneath every breath. Karen tried to stand tall. Everything we did was by the book. Gabriela stepped up. Whose book? She clicked the remote. Footage appeared: camera recordings from hidden neighborhood feeds. A child being filmed playing with chalk. A woman in a bathrobe collecting mail. A teenage boy being tailed after sunset. Gasps filled the room. Gabriela turned to the crowd. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. About fear. And it ends now. And for the first time, Karen had no words. Residents who had once stayed silent began to speak. A father whose autistic son was labeled disruptive. A widowed woman who'd been fined for putting a flower pot outside regulation zones. A teenager who had been photographed walking home after gym class. The community turned. One by one, Karen's board resigned. Her security officers vanished overnight. By the time the court date arrived, Karen stood alone. In court. Gabriela didn't need to dramatize the facts. They spoke loudly. Illegally obtained footage. Fake citations. HOA funds used to buy surveillance equipment. The judge called it what it was: systemic harassment masquerading as governance. Karen lost everything: her position, her reputation, her power. But Gabriela didn't stay to celebrate. She returned home to Emma, who was already dancing again. She had lost none of her grace, if anything. Her movements were sharper, stronger. Emma had stood up in front of the entire neighborhood and told her story. And in doing so, she found her voice. Weeks later, Gabriela received a letter from a neighbor. Thank you for reminding us that silence enables tyranny. You didn't just free your daughter. You freed all of us. Crestwood Lakes began to change. Slowly, at first. The fear was replaced with dialogue. Potlucks replaced citations. Teenagers played in the park again, without looking over their shoulders. As for Karen, she moved out in the dead of night. Her house sold quietly. Her clipboard never resurfaced. And on the clubhouse wall, where once hung the HOA charter, now hung a framed photograph: Emma on stage, mid-leap, free, fierce, unstoppable.